Hi, this is Travis with another video for you guys. So I'm here to talk about shoulder pain today. I've talked about it sort of peripherally in other videos. I've touched upon it in some of my barbell videos. I did give a little bit of an overview of it in my kabuki bar video, so you guys can always check that out. But today I want to give a specific video just to shoulder pain. I want to talk about some of the issues I've had with shoulder pain, some things that have worked for me, some things that have worked with some different people I've had, athletic population and such who've had shoulder pain. And so I'll be bringing that to you guys today. I'll be showing you some things on the model, and then we'll also be doing some exercises as the video goes on. And at the very end, I'll kind of give you my spiel about how to modify some different activities and things, because that definitely can be part of the equation for a lot of people as well. So you want to figure out what you can do maybe in the gym, see if you can alleviate some of that pain before you try to go down the road on your own, or certainly obviously it's never a bad idea to get checked out, and I would definitely recommend anybody do that if you have any doubt. But if this seems like something that you've been told you can kind of do some physical therapy for and it might respond well to, go ahead and stay tuned and we'll get started. Okay, so in my kabuki bar video, which is a few videos back, certainly you guys can check that out. I kind of gave an overview of this, but what I'm talking about specifically with this type of impingement is what we call subacromial impingement. And so you see how there's this little space here I can fit my finger in? This is your subacromial space, and it's just because it's below your acromion, which is essentially something you can kind of feel a little bit right here. It's kind of that front part of your shoulder blade. And you have this long bone here called your humerus. And with certain movements, you can see there is some tendons and ligaments this model is showing here that can kind of get bumped in to that subacromial space. And it doesn't typically happen this way. It usually happens when you're lifting your shoulder. And so some people have what they call a painful arc, meaning you can kind of move down here, not too bad. In this zone you have some pain, and then some people don't have any pain up top. Now I've definitely also had some people who do sometimes have some pain at top. Sometimes people feel it really when they're right, that end range motion. That can sometimes still be subacromial impingement too. So if you're not one of those people that doesn't have a painful arc and you only have pain up here, I wouldn't necessarily say that it isn't subacromial impingement. Sometimes it could just mean that you're getting some pinching, maybe because of the shape of your acromion, or you're pinching something a little different. Two of the really easy victims here is a muscle that kind of lives right up in here called your spinatus, and then it has a tendon that kind of runs right in here, and it's one of our external rotation shoulder muscles. So the rotator cuff is basically kind of like a dynamic joint. So, in the hip we have this deep ball and socket that sits right into it. We don't really have much of a socket with this shoulder, here. There's just a little face called a glenoid, which is kind of hard to see. You can kind of see it in here. This is trying to show the labrum. But there's just a little face that the humerus sits against. And that's because we have more mobility and range of motion in my shoulder than I do my hip. But the trade-off is we have less stability. And so it's basically held together by these muscles called the rotator cuff, which is basically four muscles. Supraspinatus, which again is the one on top, is one of the common culprits with subacromial impingement. The bicep tendon oftentimes will get pushed on too. So the bicep is that muscle that runs right in here, primarily flexes the elbow, but it does flex the shoulder a little bit as well. And so you have a short and a long head of the bicep. And so sometimes this isn't really shown here, but right on this coracoid process here, which is part of the shoulder blade, or where that bicep attaches, you can also get some pinching going on in there as well. And so sometimes you might feel some pain in front of the shoulder, sometimes it might be kind of more radiating towards the back. And again, you're going to tend to notice that oftentimes with overhead type of movement. And so if somebody's having pain with overhead movement, a lot of times subacromial impingement is one of the differentials. In other words, that's something you're thinking about. Doesn't mean it's the only thing that's out there, but it's definitely one of those things that you're going to key in on and kind of go down that road. And so that's kind of subacromial impingement in a nutshell. In my kabuki bar video, I show how internal rotation, so when I'm fixing my arm into a more internally rotated position and pressing, I'm also closing down that subacromial space, and that's one of the reasons why I like more of an open-ended position, kind of like you get with a multi-grip bar or dumbbells and that sort of thing. So you guys can check that content out if you're looking to get into that. And if you do have subacromial impingement, that can definitely be a good modification that can help you, and it's helped me. In this video specifically, though, I'm going to be showing some exercises to more specifically address subacromial impingement, and then we'll be talking a little more about barbell work at the end. All right, so depending on how symptomatic you are and how high your pain levels are, sometimes the easiest place to start is just with some simple isometrics. And so isometrics have been shown, when you do them for about 45 seconds, to be comparable to taking a lot of popular, analgesics or NSAIDs, like Tylenol and such. And so when you do an isometric, again, the muscles we're trying to key into are external rotators. And so for any of you who've done rehab before, the tried and true exercise is usually that, kind of external rotation exercise where you got a band, anchored to the side and you pull it out. Now you can do the same thing, with just a wall. I'm going to use the power rack here, but it really doesn't matter. And so basically what I'm trying to do is I can stand, the traditional way, 90 degrees, and I'm pushing my arm into the bar this way. I'm pushing my arm, like I'm trying to go over into the wall there, okay? And that's just a very straightforward isometric. Now, I can also come from the other side, and I can do the same thing coming internally, and that's going to get more of that other rotator cuff muscle called your subscap. And that muscle oftentimes is not the one that's lagging behind. Usually more of the external rotators, which are the other three. For those of you who are interested, it's the supraspinatus and your infraspinatus, again, are two of those key players, and then the teres minor. And so those muscles are more external rotators, and so you can tap into those by coming straight forward like this, but no reason why you have to stay with one angle. And you can change it up a little bit too, so I can come a little bit higher, okay? And I can also position my body a little bit differently too. And so depending on where you're symptomatic, you might want to start straight forward, and then as you're getting a little bit better, see if you can go a little bit higher, okay? And I can even come more up into this range here, and basically I'm doing the movement of trying to turn my hand out, which you can't really tell because I'm doing an isometric, but I am pushing my arm this way here. And you should again feel that kind of right in that back, cuff, back of the shoulder area. And so again, I can come up here, I can come maybe starting a little closer to my body. Some people feel better when they move in what we call the scapular plane, which isn't totally out to the side. It's a little bit more forward. Now, you don't have to be totally precise about it. I'm not going to necessarily say it all has to be this angle. Sometimes I'll come a little more in the scapular plane, do an isometric there, do it here. Again, I could come in here, do an isometric, now again coming down, okay? And so sometimes it can be helpful to play around with the angles. Now, if you're somebody who has, again, more of that overhead pain, eventually in time, and this may not happen right away, it could easily take you, a week or more to get there, you might want to go up a little bit higher and then see what you can do, kind of testing that range. And so oftentimes, let's just say hypothetically, I get pain when I'm right there, maybe I would back off that just a little bit and then try an isometric in that position. So I'm really, activating that rotator cuff muscle, hopefully, or maybe it's not firing on all cylinders when I'm getting that pain, because if it can stabilize the head of that humerus, which again is that long shoulder bone I showed you earlier, maybe I can pull it away so it can give me a little bit more breathing room underneath that subacromial space. And so that's essentially what we're trying to achieve. And then isometrics, those will work to a point. Oftentimes though, isometrics by themselves are probably not going to do it for you, and that's when you need to add in, what they call like isotonics, or basically movement. And so with that motion, you could possibly do like a sliding kind of motion, where maybe instead of just pushing in one angle, maybe I work my way up. Now obviously this is in my way, so I'd probably do this against the wall, but just to show you guys, or I could obviously drop down on a knee if I wanted to, but I'd basically be pushing backwards and simultaneously going up, so I'm getting a little bit more of that sliding range. And that's an exercise they often call a wall slide. Traditionally, sometimes you'll see people doing it more forward in front of a wall, and they're kind of pushing forward and doing it. This is kind of more of an external rotation version, so I'm pushing this way as I'm going up here, okay? And so that's a pretty cool way sometimes to get the rotator cuff, because I'm pushing extra rotation as I'm going into shoulder flexion, which maybe is going to get me through that painful zone. Now obviously, if doing that though gives you the pain, you want to back off of that and maybe just toe that line. So again, if I'm painful, right here, maybe I'd back off of that and I'd kind of work just below that range, and perhaps with some time and practice, I may be able to get into that range that I wasn't able to get into before. And if you're doing that, that's typically a good sign that, hopefully you're helping yourself move along. So that's the isometrics. Again, a little bit of isotonics into the mixture, doing kind of that wall slide. And then I'll show you guys how to do that with some bands right now. All right, so just for purposes of illustration, the exercise I was showing you earlier. So again, I've got this anchored to a bar. You can sometimes put a knot in this and you can get it in a door frame. So again, you can decide how much you want to knot it. I'm not going to knot this super tight because I'm going to take it off. But again, all I would want to be, again, that traditional angle, roughly about 90 degrees, and I'm just coming into external rotation. You can stand back a little bit so you're not hitting yourself. And again, the idea here is that you're going to be pain-free. Should just feel like muscle working and not that familiar pain. If you're getting pain, then again, you could either be dealing with something else, or you could be doing the exercise in a way that's not really helpful, in which case I'd say maybe you need to get linked up with a physical therapist so they can walk you through it. But if you can, again, this exercise doesn't tend to be too provocative. If going all the way out, though, did give you some pain, again, I'd say play the same game then, maybe back off just a little bit. So rather than going all the way out, maybe go just shy of that painful zone and try to work that, okay? And again, as you're graduating from that, you can start to get into more challenging zones. So I can kind of come up a little bit, getting extra rotation, or I can almost go up into like what they call like a face pull position, where I'm getting closer to 90 degrees. And so starting out down here sometimes is a little bit less provocative, and then you kind of can build it up. And then sometimes in the moment, it can be cool to kind of do multiple versions. So as you're getting a little farther along, maybe the shoulder is feeling better, sometimes I'll come in here and I'll work multiple angles. So just kind of mix and match and play around with it. Because in theory, you want to have a good external rotation strength through the whole spectrum of shoulder movement, not just at one angle. And strength is kind of specific. It's what we call a principle of specificity. You're only going to get stronger at what you do and what you train. And so in this case, again, I'm just wrapping my hand just to make it easy on the grip. I just come in here, at this angle, I'm really getting strong through that path versus coming up higher, okay? And then from there, a pretty cool exercise that you can also do, this would be sort of mimicking that wall slide I showed you earlier, is to start to do a little bit of flexion, okay? Because this is different than if I just lift my arm up here, there's not really much of an external rotation force to overcome. I'm mostly overcoming gravity. When I add this band into the mixture, and then I do my slide, I'm overcoming gravity, but I'm also overcoming this band trying to pull my arm in, and so I get more of that external rotation as I go into flexion. And if you also notice, I'm not completely abducted, but I'm not purely in flexion either. I'm a little bit more in what they call a scapular plane, which is again, not here, but just a little bit out, okay? And that tends to be a plane where we have a little bit more breathing room. And then from there, I would just, so again, I might start out kind of, shallow. Again, if I have that painful arc, I might, just kind of come in easy, see what range I can work, and maybe with some time and practice, hey, look at that, I'm getting my shoulder up a little higher now, until eventually, maybe you can, go up into a full range, okay? And so that's how you get external rotation with flexion, or essentially overhead movement. And that's actually a pretty nifty one to use these bands for. These are TheraBands, by the way, and I'll put the links to the bottom. For any of you that are familiar with my channel, I know you've probably seen the earlier content. I first started out with a lot of bands, so feel free to check that stuff out as well. Okay, now an exercise I like where the band is not anchored, but essentially is very similar. So that exercise we just got done doing, and you can do that in both hands with an exercise I call a pull apart. And so I'm basically, again, doing that same exact thing. What difference is I just have it in both hands now. And if you're somebody who has subacromial impingement, it'd be pretty rare you're going to have it bilaterally on both sides, but it's never a bad idea to work your good side. And there's sort of a re-education that happens when you work your good side. It kind of helps sometimes with your not so good side. And so pain and swelling can have an inhibitory effect on our muscle, and so sometimes those muscles just might not be doing their job very effectively. And so again, doing both sides just kind of kill two birds with one stone. And again, I would normally start out down here, but you eventually could bring it up a little bit higher. Again, no reason why you have to stay with only one angle. And so sometimes as people are getting better at this, just have them kind of work that spectrum, okay? And so if you're going to start going above chest level, at that point you want to usually go palms down. Now, if you're starting to get into these higher ranges, my guess would be you're probably feeling better, okay? Because if you're dealing with subacromial impingement, oftentimes those higher zones are going to be a little bit more provocative. Again, I know that's not consistent with that painful arc, but a lot of people don't feel so great at that top end either. And so if you can get up there though, more power to you. And that's just a cool way. This gets a little more deltoid, but you definitely still get those external rotators. And again, sometimes I'll just come in here and work a few different angles. But you may need to save this for a little bit farther down the road, but that exercise is there for you also. Okay, so pulling and rowing type movements are also pretty good for subacromial impingement. It's often the pushing movements that tend to work against you a little bit more. And so again, I know not everybody's going to have a Smith machine like this, but if you do, this is a good place to do it with one of these bands. Again, you can put a knot in this and you can anchor it to a door, but I'm just going to go around this since, I have it, it's pretty convenient. And from there, just a good old-fashioned horizontal row. Now with these exercises, we're not really going for strength in a more traditional sense, like the kind of strength you're going to build up in a gym, using real heavy weights. You can get there, but this can be a nice segue into that. And so again, I would just come in here, and I'm just going to do a good old-fashioned horizontal row. Again, my goal being doing this without pain, okay? I'll probably try to see if I can work, 20, 30 reps here, because I'm trying to build up some endurance in these muscles. And I'm also, if you notice, moving my shoulder blades sort of together with my elbows. So elbows come back and shoulder blades come back, not up, down, but back. I'm not tacking them down extremely hard, but I don't want to be rowing in here like this either. I'm just trying to let my shoulder blades follow my elbows, and that can be a hard thing for some people to do initially. So if that's hard for you to kind of figure that out, don't worry about it too much. You can almost just think about kind of moving your shoulder blades and squeezing them a little bit as you're pulling your elbows back. Now some people will squeeze super hard, and that's probably a little exaggerated. You don't necessarily have to do that either. It's just a little bit of a draw together of the shoulder blades, with the elbows. And that's pretty much your pure horizontal row. But as you know, there's no reason why you have to stick with one angle. And so often doing a little bit of a high to low row will kind of get you moving into that more provocative zone. And so again, I would come in here sometimes and I would work that row as well, okay? And again, you can decide how much tension you want. If you're getting way past that target number, you know, if you're doing more than 30 of these and you feel like you could still go for a long time, I'd probably try to get a band with a little bit more tension. There's no reason though why you couldn't also just work one side and maybe just do that side if this is a side I'm having pain on. And you can do it this way. Just putting it together like this will obviously make the tension a little higher. So that's one way you can get a little more life out of a band without having to get a new band. But that's the horizontal row. Now, I really also like doing an exercise called the pull down, which is sort of like a pull over, as I showed in a couple videos ago, for the rotator cuff. Now, not necessarily the pull over I showed earlier, but more with a band like this. And what you do here is you just kind of pitch yourself forward a little bit if you can tolerate it. So again, I would figure out where that zone is. So if I'm getting pain, you know, right in here, I'm going to probably work that zone just a little bit below it. So I might start in here, and I'm just going to work that zone that's not too painful for me, okay? And again, hopefully with time and practice, I'll start to notice, you know, oh, I can stand back a little farther. I'm able to bring my hands up a little higher, okay? And if you have a fixed anchor point like this where you can't really keep going up, you can pitch your body forward a little bit. And then here in this position, I'm not coming right next to my sides. I'm coming a little bit away from my sides, kind of staying a little bit in that scapular plane that I talked about earlier. Okay? And from here, I could go again even more forward. Okay? And now I'm getting almost a full range, not exactly, but if I were to bring my body up, you know, I'm pretty high now. I'm not quite at 180, but I'm getting up in the 160s. And so that's just kind of a nice way to encourage the band to kind of bring me into a little bit more shoulder flexion. And that's just a nice way to strengthen up those shoulder muscles and hopefully, again, keep you out of harm's way with the impingement. All right, the last point I want to make before I get into the discussion at the end is that muscle length can be an important part of the equation too. If you have more of those forward rounded shoulders where you're kind of hunched over, you know, those pec muscles are tight and short, that can definitely work against you and create suboptimal mechanics in your shoulder, as we call it. And so doing a good old-fashioned doorway or a pec stretch, and so you basically just take your arm. I don't really like to do the outstretched version because that sometimes puts a little more stress on the capsule here. I'll just kind of bend my arm and then just try to open up that space, just turn my body away a little bit from, you know, this area. Oftentimes I'll take that outer leg and, you know, I'll just try to open that space up. You know, nothing too fancy once you're here. You're basically just holding it. Stretching is always a nice opportunity to take some deep breaths through your belly. And, you know, I'll just do that for a minute or so, okay? And that's a nice way to open up those pecs. Another good option is laying on a foam roller. I showed that earlier in my video, so you can check out my foam rolling or my posture video. Just put a foam roller lengthwise. So you're basically laying on a foam roller like this, you know, on the ground, and you just kind of let your arms fall out to the side. That's a nice way to open up the chest. You know, thoracic extension can be part of it too. So again, if you have that kyphosis where your back is kind of rounded, you know, laying on that foam roller, you know, with time will hopefully kind of open up some of that. So definitely check out my posture video because having a posture can be a part of the equation. You know, perfect posture is kind of a debatable term, and I would say that it can contribute though to subacromial impingement. It definitely can create suboptimal, again, mechanics of the shoulder. Not to say everybody who has that kyphotic, you know, position is going to have shoulder pain, but if you're somebody who has that position, I think you are more vulnerable and more susceptible to it. And particularly when you're somebody like that and you're doing overhead stuff. So if you're, you know, kind of that more kyphotic guy and you're somebody who likes to swim, you know, you're really kind of giving yourself a double whammy because you're closing down that subacromial space and you're trying to reach into that zone on a repetitive basis. And then next thing you know, your shoulder is going to be talking to you. So that's something I would say is my 2 cents on posture. Foam roll is a great way to get after it. You know, the doorway pec stretch is an easy one because you can just do that anywhere in case you happen to be someplace you don't have a foam roller laying around. But try those out in addition to the soft tissue stuff with the exercises. You know, marry all that together and hopefully you'll get a pretty good result. And then the last thing I'll say to that is just activity modification. So let's go ahead and talk about that now. Okay, so for the last part of this, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about activity modification. It's really not a sexy part because there's no cool exercise that goes along with it. But the thing is, even if you guys are doing the best exercises out there, you know, the best rotator cuff strengthening exercises, all those things that are going to, you know, postural fixes, so to speak, that are going to take pressure off the, you know, those tendons that are being, you know, essentially smashed in that subacromial space, causing subacromial impingement, you know, it can't sometimes compete against activity that's really fanning the flames. And so sometimes, unfortunately, you do have to either cut back or stop those activities that might be aggravating you. So again, if you're that kyphotic person that really likes to swim, somebody who's doing more overhead type motion, somebody who's even just doing a lot of pushing motion, sometimes even wheelchair users, because they're always doing a lot of repetitive pushing, they're always kind of scooting themselves on their bottom. They're using their pushing muscles a lot, not their pulling muscles. So sometimes you have to try to back off those activities that are really aggravating things. Let things calm down while you're doing those strengthening exercises, assuming they're not aggravating it. And then as you're starting to get stronger, you can layer onto the cake. So I'm not always one of those people that'll tell you, stop doing this. I always will try to leave in as much activity as I can, if I think it's reasonable. And then from there, I'll try to add in some strengthening and then see where things get. But sometimes, unfortunately, playing that game, you're still kind of playing cat and mouse where you get a little bit better, but then you injure yourself. And so ultimately, sometimes you do have to kind of stop things to let some of that inflammation quiet down to move forward. Because if you're having so much pain that even doing some of these exercises is bothering you, then it's going to be really tough to kind of get any tractions. But again, sometimes in some of those more straightforward cases, you may be able to figure it out. If you can, and you can pepper it in with some of these exercises and get better, then hey, more power to you. And I certainly hope that'll be the case for any of you dealing with impingement. Leave me some comments below, let me know what you guys think. And hopefully, again, you guys will find that this stuff does work, because I've had some pretty good success with it in a lot of cases. If it's not working, though, again, that can also be an indication that maybe you're dealing with something else. So when in doubt, again, I'd always say go get checked out. Sometimes you do have to get some imaging, maybe figure out what you're up against. And, certainly, again, a clinician can diagnose that, whereas watching a video can be kind of hard to self-diagnose. So I wouldn't even play that game. Just get checked out if you're really in doubt. But all that being said, I wish you guys the best. Again, leave me some comments below. Feel free to like if you like this stuff. And as always, I hope you guys have some fun.